Good morning. You are watching and listening to Unity of Springfield in Springfield, Missouri. This is Sunday, March 7th, 2021, and this is the New Thought and World Religion adult class at Unity of Springfield in Springfield, Missouri. And I am Paul Day, and I'm going to be giving the talk today. And we do have a whole array of speakers that are just phenomenal, and I just want to point out that you're not going to get one of those today. You're getting me. So let's get started with a prayer this morning, and I just want you to kind of go ahead and center yourself. Close your eyes if you choose. Take that deep breath and feel that loving spirit inside you, that loving spirit that is always there. If we could just connect with that every moment of every day, wouldn't that be incredible? You can. With that, in that silence, Holy Spirit, we acknowledge your presence in our lives each and every day, each and every moment. With practice, we can feel that presence and allow it to be absorbed in our minds and our hearts. Our capacity to fill our hearts with your love is unlimited. Our cups overflow with your divine gifts. Today, our task, as always, is to find the ways to connect with you in such a loving and meaningful way that it becomes our greatest pleasure. To find you in every conscious moment, in every benevolent thought. Our gratitude overflows in knowing you more and more each day. And again, namaste and welcome. So I am going to take you to our talk this morning. And our talk is a book called The China Study. Excuse me. And one of my daughters read this book when it came out, several years ago, and she absolutely loved it and turned me on to it, and I picked up the book and read it, probably 10 years ago, something like that. And somehow this week, Sue and I were talking, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but I quoted something from the China Study, and it just perked my interest again. I pulled it off of my bookshelf. And I love books. I have, I don't know how many hundreds of books on my bookshelf, but I pulled it off again and I read it again, and it just really hit me. I mean, so many things about the book really struck a chord with me. So let me get started. Taken from a paragraph in the book, quote, when we were done, we had more than 8,000 statistically significant associations between lifestyle, diet, and disease variables. We had a study that was unmatched in terms of comprehensiveness, quality, and uniqueness. We had what the New York Times termed, quote, the Grand Prix of epidemiology. In my words, the China Study is going to revolutionize the way we think about diet, lifestyle, and health. And how does this tie into Unity? So let's go over a history of Unity 101. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were the founders of Unity and began their teachings in the late 20th century. What was the initiator for the teachings to even begin? Myrtle was given only months to live, actually with a condition of tuberculosis, and in those days it was truly a very serious condition, life-threatening. Myrtle turned within after listening to a talk by another New Thought motivator and knew that she could be healed by using the power of her mind through faith. It took Charles a while, but after he saw the incredible results that Myrtle received, he also knew that this was his calling and diligently proceeded to go within and heal his own health conditions. The miracles and the healings that happened afterwards to countless people were staggering, and the movement grew exponentially. In learning, excuse me, in learning to heal the body and mind, the Fillmores adopted the practice of vegetarianism in their life, and they taught this practice to all of the followers. It became an integral part of Unity to the point where Unity Inn, Unity's vegetarian restaurant, began serving over 10,000 meals per week, became an integral feature in Kansas City, and was known as the largest vegetarian restaurant in the world. The practice of abstaining from animal food and adopting a plant-based diet, along with dairy and eggs, became the standard practice in Unity for most of its adherents. In fact, the original statement of faith in Unity read at Unity churches until Myrtle's death in 1939. We believe that all life is sacred and that man should not kill or be a party to the killing of animals for food. Also that cruelty, war, and wanton destruction of human life will continue so long as men destroy animals. The popularity of vegetarianism was so strong in Unity that in 1919, 58 acres were purchased for Unity workers to retreat and for the planting of crops to support Unity Inn. Soon many surrounding farms were purchased and a great emphasis was placed on food production on the newly acquired 1,200 acres. This new location was called Unity Farms, and today you probably know it as Unity Village, the international headquarters of Unity. Charles and Myrtle wholly believed in both the ethical implications and the healing powers of a vegetarian diet. A weekly column about vegetarianism was published in Unity Weekly for decades. Charles and Myrtle carried this practice with them until their deaths. My interest in becoming acquainted to Unity stemmed from not only the original teachings of New Thought, but particularly the vegetarian practices in Unity taught by Charles and Myrtle. So this is why I have a keenly developed interest in pursuing and propounding the original teachings of Charles and Myrtle. In fact, later this year, there's going to be a first vegan-vegetarian conference for Unity held at Unity Village. The popularity of revisiting this practice has also led to the formation of 2 vegan-vegetarian programs on Unity FM. So with this, I want to introduce you to the book, The China Study, written by Dr. T. Colin Campbell, a nutritional science and researcher, and his son, Thomas Campbell, a medical doctor. The book was published in 2006. The book is written in the words of the elder Dr. Campbell, the researcher and scientist. Now, Dr. Campbell is no ordinary scientist. Dean Ornish, MD, stated, "Everyone in the field of nutrition science stands on the shoulders of Dr. Campbell, who is one of the giants in the field. This is one of the most important books about nutrition ever written. Reading it may save your life." Dr. Joel Fuhrman, MD, author of the bestseller Eat to Live, wrote that this work was, quote, "one that could change the future for all of us. Every healthcare provider and researcher in the world must read it." David Klein, the publisher of Living Nutrition magazine, wrote, "The China Study is the most important book on nutrition and health to come out in the last 75 years. The Nobel Prize winner and professor of physics, Robert Richardson, wrote, "The China Study is a story that needs to be heard." Dr. Junshi Shen, the senior research professor at the Institute of Nutrition and Food Safety, wrote, "The China Study is the most convincing evidence yet on preventing heart disease, cancer, and other Western diseases by dietary means." And lastly, Marilyn Gentry, president of the American Institute for Cancer Research, wrote, "The China Study is a moving and insightful history of the struggle still ongoing to understand and explain the vital connection between our health and what we eat." So what is this? A look at the premier author, Dr. Campbell, was raised on a farm in Virginia. He learned the value of hard work and from his family farm prospered and ate the American diet of meat and dairy. Later, he became a career nutritional scientist and was involved in the discovery of a chemical named dioxin. He authored hundreds of scientific papers, sat on numerous government expert panels, and directed one of the most important diet and health studies ever conducted, the China study. So, Dr. Campbell has been a member and president of numerous prestigious national scientific organizations, such as the American Institute for Cancer Research and the World Cancer Research Fund. Many knew him as the co-defendant with Oprah Winfrey when a group of cattlemen decided to sue her after she stated her intention not to eat beef. So let's begin. Dr. Campbell writes in his introduction, "The public's hunger for nutrition never ceases to amaze me, even after devoting my entire working life to conducting experimental research into nutrition and health. Should you buy food that is labeled organic to avoid pesticide exposure? Are environmental chemicals a primary cause of cancer? Is your health predetermined by the genes you inherited when you were born? Do carbohydrates really make you fat? Should you really be more concerned about the total amount of fat you eat, or just saturated fats and trans fats? What vitamins, if any, should you be taking? Should you eat fish, and if so, how often?" My guess is that you're really not sure of the answers to these questions. Real science has been buried beneath a clutter of irrelevant or even harmful information, junk science, fad diets, and food industry propaganda. And Dr. Campbell answers all of those questions in this book, and that's done by research, scientific research. So for over 50 years at the very highest levels, Dr. Campbell had been designing and directing large research projects and translating massive amounts of scientific research onto national expert panel reports. In his decades of top national nutritional research, Dr. Campbell states, there we go, "Synthetic chemicals in the environment and in your food, as problematic as they may be, are not the main causes of cancer. The genes that you inherit from your parents are not the most important factors in determining whether you fall prey to any of the 10 leading causes of death. There are more powerful solutions to be employed before genetic research solutions should be researched. Obsessively controlling your intake of any one nutrient will not result in long-term health. Vitamins and supplements do not give you long-term protection against disease. Drugs and surgery don't cure the diseases that kill most Americans. Your doctor probably doesn't know what you need to do to be the healthiest you can be." And those are all in the words of Dr. Campbell. So he goes on to state, "We must know why misinformation dominates our society and why we are grossly mistaken in how we investigate diet and disease, how we promote health, and how we treat illness. America's health is failing. We spend far more per capita on healthcare than any other society in the world. And yet 2/3 of Americans are overweight. Now 34 million plus people have diabetes. Heart disease is our number one killer. And the war on cancer is a miserable failure. More than half of all Americans require taking a prescription drug, and over 100 million Americans have high cholesterol. Dr. Campbell says our problems come down to 3 issues: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. At the beginning of Dr. Campbell's career, he was on a path to promote better health by advocating the consumption of more meat, milk, and eggs. It was his sequel to living his life on his farm, and he felt this American diet was the best in the world. He would never have guessed that food was closely related to health problems. Most of us eat what is tasty, convenient, or what our parents fed or taught us. We live within cultural boundaries that define our food preferences. Dr. Campbell graduated from MIT and took a faculty position at Virginia Tech University. He began coordinating technical assistance for a project in the Philippines working with malnourished children. Part of the project involved examining a high prevalence of liver cancer in children, usually an adult disease. It was thought that a high consumption of aflatoxin, a mold found in peanuts and corn, caused the problem. Aflatoxin has been called one of the most potent carcinogens ever discovered. In this project, he discovered a dark secret. Children who ate the highest protein diets were the ones most likely to get liver cancer. They were the children of the wealthiest families. He then noticed a research report from India that had very provocative findings. Researchers there studied two groups of rats. Both groups were given this poisonous aflatoxin. One group was fed a diet composed of 20% protein, a level near what many of us in the West consume, and the other group was fed a diet of 5% protein. Every animal fed the 20% protein diet diagnosed with liver cancer. Every animal fed the 5% protein avoided liver cancer. This left no doubt that nutrition trumped chemical carcinogens. This information trumped everything he had been taught. It was heretical to say that protein wasn't healthy, let alone that it promoted cancer. Dr. Campbell knew that he had to embrace the independence that he had learned on the farm. He knew that he might be going against some of the ingrained nutritional advice most Americans embraced. He decided to start up an in-depth laboratory program that would investigate the role of nutrition, especially protein, in the development of cancer. He and his colleagues cautiously framed their hypothesis. They were rigorous in their methodology and conservative in interpreting the findings. He wanted to understand not only whether, but how protein might promote cancer. His research became funded for 27 years by the best reviewed funding sources: National Institutes of Cancer, the American Cancer Society, and the American Institute for Cancer Research. Their results were reviewed for publication in many of the best scientific journals. What they found was shocking. Low-protein diets inhibited the initiation of cancer by aflatoxin, regardless of how much of this carcinogen was administered to the subjects. Low-protein diets also dramatically blocked subsequent cancer growth. In fact, dietary protein proved to be so powerful in its effect that we could turn on and off cancer growth simply by changing the level consumed. Absolutely amazing. And it really shocked me when I read that again, that they could actually turn cancer on and off by the amount of protein that was fed to the subjects. The amounts of protein being fed were those that we humans consume routinely. They didn't feed the subjects extraordinary levels of, as is so often the case in cancer studies. But what was most extraordinary was that not all proteins had that effect. What protein consistently and strongly promoted cancer? Casein, which makes up 87% of cow's milk protein. What protein did not promote cancer, even at high levels of intake? The safe proteins were from plants. Following his early research on protein's effect on cancer, he went on to direct the most comprehensive study of diet, lifestyle, and disease ever done with humans in the history of biomedical research. It was a massive undertaking jointly arranged through Cornell University, Oxford University, and the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine. This project surveyed a vast range of diseases and diet and lifestyle factors in rural China and later Taiwan. This was known as the China Study, and it produced more than 8,000 statistically significant associations between dietary factors and disease. What made this project especially remarkable is that among all the associations that were relevant to diet and disease, so many pointed to the same findings. People who ate the most animal-based foods got the most chronic disease. Even relatively small intakes of animal-based food were associated with adverse effects. People who ate the most plant-based foods were the healthiest, intended to avoid chronic disease. The results could not be ignored. Dr. Campbell did not rest alone on the animal studies, nor human studies in China. He sought out the findings of other researchers and clinicians and incorporated them into this book. All these findings have proved to be some of the most exciting findings of the past 50 years. The findings show that heart disease, diabetes, and obesity can be reversed with a healthy diet. Other research shows that various cancers, autoimmune diseases, bone health, kidney health, health vision, cognitive brain disorders are convincingly influenced by diet. Most importantly, the diet that has time and again been shown to reverse and or prevent these diseases is the same whole food, plant-based diet that was found to promote optimal health in laboratory research and in the China study. The findings are consistent. So you might ask, why haven't we heard about this before? And why aren't these results publicized more and become much more commonplace? Americans are confused when it comes to diet. The answer has to do with how health information is generated and communicated and who controls such activities. Dr. Campbell has been behind the scenes generating health information for a very long time and tells the world in his personal and scientific life, as well as through this book, what's wrong with the system. The distinctions between government, industry, science, and medicine have become blurred. The distinctions between making a profit and promoting health have become blurred. The problems with the system do not come in the form of Hollywood-style corruption. The problems are much more subtle and yet much more dangerous. The result is massive amounts of misinformation for which the average American consumer pays twice. They provide the tax money to do the research, and then they provide the money for their health care to treat their largely preventable diseases. So I'm going to be doing the first 3 chapters in the China study, and my next talk I'm probably going to try and concentrate on really doing the results of the findings of the actual studies in China and how that relates to a whole wide range of various diseases. So chapter 1 is defining the problem. So if you're a male in this country, the American Cancer Society says you have a 47% chance of getting cancer. I'm one of those. If you're a female, you have a 38% chance. These are among the highest in the world. Yet we've spent decades on a massively funded war on cancer. Contrary to what many believe, cancer is not a natural event. We are a growing society, literally. Today, almost 40% of Americans are obese, and 70% are overweight. As late as the 1970s, only 13% of people were obese. The average American weighs 24 more pounds than in 1960. To the average American who has traveled internationally, this problem is common knowledge. To the average Asian weighs 127 pounds. The average European, 156 pounds. And the average American weighs 178 pounds. The wide ranges of problems and diseases associated with weight are vast. And yet cancer and obesity are not the greatest problem for Americans. It's heart disease. Heart disease will kill 1 out of every 3 Americans. So a few years ago, my cousin called me on the phone and said, "Come here quick." She had just taken my mother to the hospital and said it didn't look good. I rushed to the hospital in Iowa, and I stayed there for a week. At times they thought my mother was going to die, and they didn't know why. It turned out to be her medications. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, adverse effects from drugs or surgery kill over 225,000 people per year. Over 100,000 die every year from unintended reactions to the medication that is supposed to revive their health. Such was the problem with my mother. She was taking so many medications, and there just isn't enough research to document the effects of all these drug interactions. Our healthcare system is responsible for the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. And Dr. Campbell states, if nutrition were better understood and prevention and natural treatments were more accepted in the medical community, we would not be pouring so many toxic, potentially lethal drugs into our bodies at the last stage of disease. Healthcare here is expensive. Americans spend more than double on healthcare what other non-Americans spend. In 2018, we spent $3.7 trillion on healthcare. It was 18% of our gross domestic product. I'm sure this past year it has grown tremendously higher still. So according to Dr. Campbell, the American people need to know the truth. They need to know what the unbiased science says. People need to know why we are unnecessarily sick, why too many of us die early despite billions spent on research. The irony is that the solution is simple and inexpensive. The answer to the American health crisis is the food that each of us chooses to put in our mouths each day. It's as simple as that. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on many of the past and current diet and nutrition plans which have captivated many Americans over the last decades. What Dr. Campbell states is that most of them begin with simple philosophies based more on opinion and flawed or biased studies. Dr. Campbell's findings are backed by numerous scientific studies which are replicated by his fellow colleagues. He states, "I did not begin with preconceived ideas, philosophical or otherwise, to prove the worthiness of plant-based diets." Remember, Dr. Campbell was raised on a farm. He consumed the traditional American diet, and he began his studies believing that animal protein was the answer to the world's health problems. My only interest now is to explain the scientific basis for my views in the clearest possible way. Hippocrates said, "There are in effect 2 things to know and to believe one knows. To know is science. To believe one knows is ignorance." Genetic predisposition. One of the more exciting benefits of good nutrition is the prevention of diseases that are thought to be due to genetic predisposition. We now know that we can largely avoid these, quote, genetic diseases, even though we may harbor the gene that is responsible for the disease. In his own laboratory, Dr. Campbell has shown that in experimental animals, cancer growth can be turned on and off by nutrition, despite very strong genetic predisposition. These results are nothing less than spectacular. The same effects have been indicated over and over again in humans. Dr. Campbell states, "My journey in science over the past 45 years has convinced me that it is now more urgent than ever to show how people can avoid these tragedies. The science is there, and it must be made known. We cannot let the status quo go unchallenged and watch our loved ones suffer unnecessarily. It's time to stand up, clear the air, and take control of our health." Chapter 2 is on proteins. Dr. Campbell's entire professional career in biomedical science is centered on protein. The story on protein, however, is part science, part culture, and a good dose of mythology. The great philosopher Goethe stated, we are best at hiding those things which are in plain sight." Protein was discovered in 1839. It's a nitrogen-containing chemical. Protein has now loomed as the most sacred of all nutrients. In the 19th century, protein was synonymous with meat, and this connection has stayed with us ever since. Most people equate protein with animal-based food. The German scientist Carl Voigt found that man needed 48.5 grams of protein per day, although he recommended a huge 118 grams because of cultural bias. Today, 55 grams is recommended. So protein had and still occupies an affluent sway. If you were rich, you ate meat. And if you were poor, you ate staple plant foods like potatoes and bread. Elitism and arrogance dominated, and they still do. Protein, fat, carbs, and alcohol provide virtually all of the calories that we consume. Protein is a vital component of our body. There are hundreds of thousands of different kinds of proteins. They function as enzymes, hormones, structural tissue, and transport molecules, all which make life possible. They are constructed as long chains of thousands of amino acids. Proteins wear out on a regular basis and they have to be replaced. This is accomplished by consuming foods that contain protein. Various food proteins are said to be of different quality, depending on how well they provide the needed amino acids that used to replace our body proteins. The, quote, best proteins are thought to be animal sourced as they contain all the amino acids. The, quote, lower quality plant proteins may be lacking in one or more protein acids. However, as a group, they do contain all the amino acids. There is now a mountain of research showing that, quote, low quality plant proteins, which allows for slow but steady synthesis of new proteins, is the healthiest type of protein. We now know that the human body can derive all of the essential amino acids from the natural variety of plant proteins that we encounter every day. It doesn't require eating higher quantities of plant protein or meticulously planning every meal. Protein gap. Dr. Campbell went through his early career figuring out ways to increase the consumption of protein, especially that sourced from high-quality animal products. His graduate research cited such. His belief that world hunger and malnutrition among children in third world countries was a result of not having enough animal protein to consume. He writes, the great mass of the population of these countries subsists mainly on foods derived from plants, frequently deficient in protein, which results in poor health. When he left MIT and he took a position at Virginia Tech, he started what he called a mothercraft self-help project in the Philippines. He wanted to educate mothers of malnutrition children. malnourished children, Fish as a source of protein was limited to the seacoast in the Philippines. The scientists chose peanuts as a source of protein for their research in the interior of the country because the crop could be grown most anywhere. Peanuts are rich in protein. There was, however, a problem with this. Peanuts were often contaminated with a fungus-produced toxin called aflatoxin. It was shown to cause liver cancer in rats. It was said to be the most potent chemical carcinogen ever discovered. They started off by identifying who in the Philippines was consuming aflatoxin and subject to liver cancer. They found that the greatest source of aflatoxin was from peanut butter, as the better peanuts were usually put in jars of peanuts, what we call cocktail jars. In their study on children who got liver cancer, they discovered that those children from the best-fed families, the wealthy, who consumed the most animal protein, had the highest incidence of cancer. At that time, a research paper surfaced on correlating the intake of protein to incidence of cancer on lab animals. Scientists didn't want to believe that protein could be killing people, but Dr. Campbell knew there must be something to this. Since Dr. Campbell had lost an aunt and a mother to cancer, he had an interest into looking into this further. And this is the last chapter that I'm going to be talking about today, Chapter 3, Turning Off Cancer. Americans fear cancer more than any other disease. So there are 3 stages to cancer. The first one is initiation. This initiation initiates cancer-prone cells. Chemicals that do this are called carcinogens. These chemicals are most often the byproducts of industrial processes, although they can also be found in nature. Promotion is newly formed cancer-prone cells ready to grow by means of enzymes. And remember, what has enzymes? The proteins. The beginning stage of growth occurs here. And then progression, when a bunch of advanced cancer cells progress in their growth until they have done their final damage. So let me go back through the 3 stages of cancer: initiation, promotion, and progression. The entire initiation stage can take place in a very short period of time, even minutes. It is time required for the chemical carcinogen to be consumed, absorbed into the blood, transported into the cells, and changed into its active product, bonded to DNA, and passed on to the daughter cells. Now, when the new daughter cells are formed, the process is complete. The daughter cells and their progeny will forever be genetically damaged, giving rise to the potential for cancer. The promotion stage occurs over a far longer period of time than initiation, often many years for humans. And I've heard this very often that, when someone does get cancer, you've heard that this has been in process for years. It's when the newly initiated cluster multiplies and grows into larger and larger masses, and a clinically visible tumor is formed. The initial cancer cells will not grow and multiply unless the right conditions are met. This is where certain dietary factors are so important. Promotion is reversible, depending on whether the early cancer growth is given the right conditions to grow. This is all coming from the book. These dietary factors, called promoters, feed cancer growth. Cancer growth flourishes when there are more promoters than anti-promoters, and sometimes we hear of these as antioxidants. It is a push-pull process. The profound importance of this reversibility cannot be overemphasized. The progression stage involves a developing cancer tumor wandering away from its initial site in the body and invading neighboring or distant tissue. When the cancer takes on these deadly properties, it is considered malignant. It is considered metastasizing when it breaks away from its initial home. And we're going to there we go. So, how does protein affect cancer initiation? The protein that we consume alters tumor growth by promoting growth or detoxification by the enzymes present in the liver. And this all goes to the quantity and the quality of the protein. The amount of protein that we eat changes the enzyme activity. Enzyme activity is modified simply by changing the level of protein intake. Low protein diets or their equivalents reduce tumors by the following mechanisms. They have less toxins which enter the cells multiply more slowly, multiple changes occur within the enzyme complex to reduce its activity, the quantity of critical components of the relevant enzymes was reduced, and less toxin DNA adducts are formed. What Dr. Campbell found was that microscopic tumor formation was almost entirely dependent on how much protein was consumed, regardless of how much toxin was given. Animals starting with the most cancer initiation, which are toxins, develop substantially less microscopic tumor formation when fed the 5% protein diet as to opposed to the higher 20% protein diet. When the animals surpassed the body's requirement for protein, disease onset began. The average American consumes about 16% protein. So not all proteins are alike. For all the experiments that Dr. Campbell was working on in the Philippines, they were using casein, a cow's milk protein. In these experiments, they found that plant protein didn't promote cancer growth, even at the highest levels of plant protein intake. All animals in Dr. Campbell's studies in the Philippines on cancer formation were given the same amount of aflatoxin. At the end of the study, all animals fed the 5% animal protein diet were alive at the end of the study. All animals fed the 20% animal protein died. There was no doubt cow's milk protein is and was an exceptionally potent cancer promoter in rats dosed with aflatoxin. So soon Dr. Campbell and many other researchers were starting to do research on how diet affects disease formation. A pattern was starting to emerge. Nutrients from animal-based foods increase tumor development, while nutrients from plant-based foods decrease tumor development. And this is where I'm going to leave the talk for today. I've covered the first 3 chapters from the book, The China Study. And next time I'm going to continue where we left off. Dr. Campbell took his studies to China to study the role of nutrition, lifestyle, and disease on humans in the most comprehensive manner ever undertaken in the history of medicine. So I'm going to conclude my talk with just a few thoughts of my own. I'm no illusionist, and I know that most of you don't have any inclination to run out and drastically change the way you perceive diet. And I've been a vegetarian most of my entire adult life, since I was 17 actually, and I still consume a quantity of animal protein. Discontinuing or greatly reducing animal protein from my diet is a significant change for me. I crave most dairy products. However, this China study really has opened my eyes to looking at the food I eat differently. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were strict vegetarians. They lived at the turn of the century when the initiators of cancer were greatly diminished. Toxins in our air and water and products were minimal at best. Scientific research was in its infancy. Yet they had the foresight to see that not only was high intake of animal protein consumption unhealthy, but also spiritually and ethically deficient. They encouraged Unity students to abstain from meat and only eat the animal products that did not unnecessarily kill. So next time I talk, I'll be giving out more specific information from the book about various human research studies, especially on findings in China, and then on specific diseases and how Dr. Campbell addresses these diseases. I encourage you to read and reflect on your own. If our 16% animal protein diet that we Americans consume is hurting us, what do we do? According to the research, a 5% animal protein diet keeps us safe. To jump ahead, Dr. Campbell encourages a diet with the least animal protein possible. Following his studies, he concludes that the greater the amount of animal protein, the greater the chance for disease and early death. The less animal protein consumed, the better results are for our health. If you're like me, you might want to consider greatly reducing your animal protein intake and incorporating a greater plant-based diet. How much is too much and how much is safe? I'll be talking about that in the next time that I talk. Here's to your health, spiritually, mentally, and physically. I wish you a great day and a fantastic week. Don't forget, next Sunday is daylight savings time. Yes! I love more daylight sunshine. Spring forward 1 hour, and that brings me to the next item. Spring. It's coming soon. Give yourselves a big hug and know that God loves you, and so do we. And with that, let me take you to the next page. If you would like to make a donation towards our ministry, you can go to our website at unityofspringfield.org. You can give through our Tithely app, which you can download. You can go to PayPal at ccunity at sbcglobal.net, or you can do it the old-fashioned way. That's kind of like what I do. You can mail a check to 2214 East Seminole Street in Springfield, Missouri, 65804. And don't forget, that is Unity of Springfield, Missouri. Today's 11 o'clock celebration service is Even Mystics Have Bills to Pay. And isn't that the truth? Next Sunday, adult education, I think, is going to be Dr. Paula Armknecht. Kingdom Come, Understanding the Book of Revelation by Ed Townley. Now, this is not for sure. If Paul is not able to do this, I'm going to be continuing on with the China study. Come and join us in person by registering online at Unity of Springfield. I love you all, folks. I really wish you the best each and every day, each and every moment. God blesses you, and namaste.